it is your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. Much love going out to all the beautiful, empowered harmonizers. And we are zooming in and focusing in today on a great viewer question, and that is how to deal with the hyperarousal, sort of that stimulus response experience that comes after you have been traumatized by controlling or manipulative relationships. In other words, you just seem to launch into a sort of agitated state, or what we would call hyperarousal, or emotional dysregulation. It's difficult to balance out. And how do you sort of come into balance after these extremes, sort of the dysregulation of being hyper aroused and then sort of shutting down? And it's basically well known that to be chronically controlled by someone who is pathological, malignant, or a severe narcissist, someone who might even be psychopathic, someone who is really operating without a lot of conscience, without a lot of sentient feeling, they tend to sort of hyper arouse the people whom they target, or who the malignant narcissist will target as their supply source. In other words, the person who they draw a lot of their sustenance from, their emotional sustenance, the people who are there to stroke their ego day in and day out, night in and night out, the people who they extract that life chi, that energy force from. And oftentimes there is an extreme sort of hyper arousal. In other words, this person can be quite emotionally demanding. Demanding meaning that they are sort of on this, high juiced up state. The narcissist will launch into sort of grandiose thinking, planning, and really require a lot of energy and support from those people around them. In other words, chop, chop, do what I say. Laugh when I say laugh. Jump when I say jump. And there's a feeling of sort of being overwhelmed or taken over by this person. And there can be a lot of extremes, a lot of cognitive dissonance, where things are really sort of in a disconnect, meaning they have mistreated you or ignored you or not been there for you, yet you continue to feed the fire. You continue to fan the flame of their ego to stay in the relationship, to adapt and adjust. These individuals are oftentimes the ones who create this sort of chaos in their environment. And this is how they keep a lot of plates going. This is how they stay in control. It is a manipulation and it is a power play. So how do you sort of balance out these extremes? How do you learn to regulate when someone has gotten you into this feeling of launching into a hyper arousal, or wanting to be very reactive, the sort of hypervigilance, hypersensitivity that tends to permeate the internal physiology, the internal environment of those people who have been around these chronic manipulators? Well, it's really, really important to once again look at how these people operate. In other words, understanding that they will extract, they are the takers of the world. They are the people who really look to others for an extreme neediness. So even though these people, they might create a codependent where your needs become fused with their needs. In other words, there's no difference. There's no you and me. There's this feeling of symbiotic, or in other words, if you're happy, then I'm happy. The codependent, the people-pleasing propensity that can emerge from this controlling aspect eventually needs to be separated and extracted. You need to be able to detract from this as really, and looking at them as sort of a distraction versus a focus in your life, in order to balance out this extreme sort of hyper arousal, hyper agitated state that then can spill over into other areas. People might call it mood lability, where you just seem to be extremely moody around these people. It can create a moodiness in others. because you're so used to either the hyperarousal, the dopamine that can come when you feel like you're bonding, but you're really just people pleasing. You don't really have a heart-to-heart connection, because to have that bonding, you have to be able to receive also. There has to be a balance. And so this can really create a state of imbalance within the individuals as a reaction to their force. It creates a counter force within the individuals who have been, within their proximity or their environment, or in close association with, like, a family or a workplace. And so when they're not there, you kind of will feel a loss of direction, a loss of focus. I feel lost. I feel alone. And that sort of emptiness is oftentimes very scary and can create this extreme, the extreme to go and sort of relieve and alleviate this pain. How can I be distracted? It's, once again, it's attending to the agitation. The neurophysiological addiction that is created by this cycle, the body is trying to essentially regulate this flow of information and chemical reactions within the emotional body. So the body has a tendency to homeostasis, which means it's going to be like a seesaw. If you're highly agitated, and then eventually it's going to come down. And when you're really in that down state, it's the feeling of being without direction or being lonely. And this oftentimes is very painful, scary, so people will then launch into a distraction or a defense mechanism state in order to cope essentially with this feeling, which is unwanted, undesirable. However, it is to kind of take a new look at this feeling state. And the feeling of being lonely is really a look at really sort of the focus and the direction that you need to cultivate within. So rather than it being distracted, oftentimes the feeling of being lonely is the counter effect or the aftermath of kind of coming out of and emerging from the distraction of the people pleasing, of the trying to control things. This trying to control the outcome has oftentimes been brewed in the previous dynamics of the relationship. In other words, trying to mitigate and mediate the rage or the unpredictability that can cause from the hyperarousal of these manipulative individuals. Trying to jump when they say jump, but I jump and I hurt myself, yet you don't really seem to care. So it becomes very one-directional. And then reinforced by flying monkeys, it can really cause a lot of cognitive dissonance and confusion in a loss of direction. And eventually that shut down feeling where one is feeling lonely or isolated. Those are usually the words that people will then describe when they are sort of separating or kind of retracting from this individual. It's a deflation. It's like an anticlimactic feeling. In other words, there's, everything has been perpetuated on this chaotic, and then the shutdown feels like a nothingness, an emptiness, being without. However, this is a state that you should not feel that you have to run from or flee from. Just because you feel on your own, independent, outside of this chaos, the unhectic feeling really is something crucial for you to embrace. It's a clarity of mind. It's a state of purity, oftentimes which has been befuddled and sabotaged by these previous manipulators or controllers. So there's the feeling of emptiness that oftentimes comes when you are leaving the state of this relationship, feeling like nothingness, feeling like, nothing in my life feels good. I feel empty, depleted, unhappy. And this oftentimes is just really a state of going through the feeling of grief from sort of a loss of a type of a relationship or a way of relating. So it's really like saying goodbye, fair riddance to the chaos, to the lie. You're telling the lie goodbye. You're telling the fakeness goodbye. You're dismissing it. You're saying, I'm ready to move on. And sometimes this very, very beginning awareness is very, very painful. It feels like you've done something wrong, perhaps made a wrong decision. Am I doing the right thing? This indecisiveness, this waffling back and forth from the extremes can seem to be very uncomfortable. Fits of shutting down, not knowing, not having an appetite for life, the way that perhaps you were agitated and had an appetite for fighting, appetite for destruction. I think that was like a Guns N' Roses, a relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath very much becomes that way. It's like an appetite for destruction. It's sort of getting into that hyperarousal state and wanting to put up your dukes. That fight or flight is really, you've really hooked into this situation, and you feel like you want to continue. A pattern within your physiology has a tendency to want to repeat itself. The neurobiology likes to follow patterns, especially when it's been reinforced by either chronic manipulation, chronic traumatizing relationships. Chronic trauma in your environment can create and maintain this engineered chaos, this sort of hyperarousal, agitation, hypervigilance, preparing for the worst. What now? And when things start going well, it's like, it's not okay to be okay. You've in the part of the trauma bond is the understanding or feeling that it's not okay to be myself. It's not okay for me to tell the truth. It's not okay for me to, shake out the rug and really sort of clean out all the family secrets. See, guys, see all this? You don't want to air your dirty laundry. There's oftentimes too much. But oftentimes, who you really need to come clean with is yourself in order to help to regulate this sort of extreme from the feeling of hyperarousal, hyperagitation, the parasympathetic nervous system which is agitated, the fight or flight, oftentimes, which is meant for maybe, brief moments. In other words, if you're driving and then someone pulls in front of you, you begin to get shocked, and then your reactions speed up, your eyes get wide open, you start breathing, you get this surge of energy, and then you start thinking and looking, your body is hyper aroused. This state oftentimes is what is set up within the relationship, within the chronic manipulator, to be in that state is a kind of a way of life. And the body is not meant to live in hyperarousal. It is meant to live in a state of calm. It's meant to live in a state of ease and comfort and being okay. In other words, being able to self-regulate and balance with a happy blend of both of these. However, when you're really surrounded by these manipulators, it becomes a seesaw effect. Self-regulation becomes very difficult, if not ever experienced. And so this seesaw, some people might say, it's exhausting. Some good days, some bad days. It's very important that you then understand that this chaos is not the body's natural state. The state of tension, of flexing, always gripping. People hold their stress in different areas. It's very important to do a body scan. Where do you feel inflamed? Where are you gripping? Some people grip with their toes. Some people grip with their teeth. Some people armor up with their shoulders. Some are, they're drinking a glass of milk and they're just, like holding on like they could crush it like an empty beer can. Some people really squeeze in their glutes. Some, are really into their core, and their groundedness is, oftentimes off center. So oftentimes becoming aware of your physiology when you're being in this moment is important. Take a moment, every couple hours to do a body scan and to sort of check in on yourself. Am I, am I out of alignment? Am I kind of throwing myself out? Am I, always sort of bracing myself, even though there's no, impending threat around? Am I sort of armoring for the uncertainty and the unexpected? The fight or flight, that fight consciousness. And let me just, release that fight consciousness for a moment. It's okay to be okay. Despite the messages that oftentimes these manipulators will try to insinuate and shovel in, and heap it on really thick, is to say, even though their words, their actions, the things that hurt are meant to cut down, and that perpetuate this feeling of the inferiority complex, it becomes very complicated because it can have its talons in many different areas of a person's being, and really affect everything from digestion to their sleep to the things that they focus on or that they don't focus on, and getting distracted in order to sort of regulate this and cope. And so really, it is to give yourself a little bit of a break and a breather, and to say it's okay to be okay. It's okay, and I know actually my strengths and my good, and I'm going to go on despite that. And so, and it's pulling sort of, like getting a tug of war released within you. So oftentimes that feeling of emptiness and depletion, or the distraction to get away from that empty feeling, will be very strong, like a tug of war, like there's a big thick rope. Someone's, if you've ever had those, I don't know, like camping trips or things in school, remember when there was the tug of war and you're just pulling, and then you could feel the other side? What happens when you let go? That person, that other side, ends up, quote unquote, winning the war, winning, the tug of war. Stop that tug within yourself. Just let it go. Just stop for a moment and get a sense of okay, and feeling okay if you're not always agitated and fighting, either within yourself or fighting the pain. What you might call the emptiness, what you might call the isolation, what you might call the independence, what you might call self-regulation, self-empowerment. This is the seat of where your personal power comes from, not the force, not the fight or flight. It is that clarity and kind of coming back into the now and stopping the cessation of anxiety from the past or projection towards the future. It's just sort of letting that go for a moment. It's okay to be okay. Oftentimes people who are surrounded by the chronic controllers, they're always fed the message, like a baby robin, who's in a nest from its mother. They're fed the seeds of you're not okay. You are less than. You are stupid. You're too much. You're too, whatever. It is oftentimes at the hands of these negative, poisonous messages, which then people then, continue to try to mitigate. And so it's the fighting back. It's the punch. Someone punches you, you're going to punch back. Someone puts up a high five, you're going to give a high five back. You're used to mirroring the needs of the needy malignant narcissist and the needy, the extremely needy psychopath. And so this creates a trauma bond. It creates a trauma connection. It perpetuates this tug of war, like a thick, really strong rope, whatever they make the rope out of. What is your rope made out of? How thick is it? How strong is the tension? Where do you feel this tug within your body? And can you let it go? And can you be okay with that very, very moment of what we call, the valleys of the soul? It's like being in the bottom of the Grand Canyon in that little Snake River and going, holy guacamole, you know, I am way down in the cavern. I am driving, you know, with, I don't feel anything. I feel a sense of numbness or emptiness. It's that sort of shutdown. It's the down to the up. It's the opposite of that agitation, that chaos, and that, you know, that sort of binaural experience. And to look at that and say, you know what, this is now the cessation of this pattern. When you feel that emptiness, it's basically your physiology saying, you know what, we got to knock it off. We got to knock it out. We cannot perpetuate on the same chaos. It's your body just saying, stop. And that's actually a positive stop. It is, even though in the back of your mind, the reason why it feels alone and empty is because you're not people-pleasing anymore. You're not giving into the manipulation. You're not giving into the lie. You're claiming your right. You're claiming your perspective. You're claiming yourself. This is the beginning of empowerment. Even though it might feel very alone, like, you know, you're in the Grand Canyon and you're yodeling and you're wondering if anybody hears you and it's nothing but an echo bouncing off the canyon walls, believe me, that is the depth of your strength. That is where the strength begins. Oh my God, peace and harmony. I've never really experienced this before. I've never been able to experience it. Well, hallelujah that you are able to experience that. That is, once you really sit with that and you really begin to get comfortable with the discomfort, that which you have been avoiding, that is why it feels so, you know, it is coming clean with oneself. It's coming clear. It's coming honest. It's becoming strong. It's to begin to pick oneself up and be with oneself in that moment. To be with that painful, oftentimes feeling that you've exited life. You know, I'm no longer living my life. You know, something has changed. That is the beginning of the beginning. That is the beginning of your breakthrough. And oftentimes it is that very experience which you have pushed away when you've perpetuated and sort of stayed in that trauma connection. You're still gripping that rope. You know, you're carrying it here, there. You're doing the dishes. You know, you're making the bed. You've still got that rope. You know, let it go. Begin to move with a little bit different vibe. And begin to say, you know what? I am here. I am now, and all is well. I'm here and I'm in the now, and all is well. And I'm releasing that which has held me back. And if you can release that, find the areas that you've been really clenching tight and begin to release. Begin to kind of like have that dance of emotion where you feel a little bit more graceful. You're breathing a little bit deeper. You know, you've got like a little bit of a flow and a better vibe. In other words, you're dancing like no one is looking, and you're not ashamed. You're not self-conscious. This is when the seat of your best self is beginning to inhabit you, and, you know, the spirit of the healing spirit, whether you call it Jesus, the angels, your best self, you know, all that is beginning to enter you. And it is okay to face that feeling of emptiness and to say, I am now going to fill that with. And find, you know, we talk about in the book that I'm writing, the recovery gift. Once, you know, we haven't brought that up for a while. And I hope that you're all doing that. When you go out on your recovery date and you're doing things that are recognizing and validating that oneness, that wholeness, that unadulterated self, I want you to really get into the habit of giving yourself a recovery gift, which is a signal, a priming to your subconscious mind that you know what's up and that you are there for yourself. It's like a bond within yourself versus a trauma bond. That bond will replace and displace that old trauma bond. So the new will outdo the old. It'll cause it to fade away. This is a process. This is not a one and done. It's not like, oh yeah, peace and harmony. I got my one recovery gift. I did it. I got that one white candle. I got that one whatever. I got that one bracelet. I got that one ring. I got that one book. You know, whatever it is, you need to be doing that recovery gift, no matter how small. It doesn't have to be expensive. I mean, it can even be one apple, one banana, something that you, with intention, go and select. This is my recovery gift for myself this week. And you might, you might then find that, and, as you're clearing things out, you then see that you're then replacing this internal connection with that chaos, which oftentimes in the beginning, it feels like a very deadening beginning. It feels like you're in kind of the dark winter, which we're in right now. We're hitting record-breaking, like sub-zero, like literally Antarctic wind is coming down into the greater Midwest of the United States, coming down from the North Pole, and everything is like put on lockdown. Things are closed down. It's 25 degrees below zero out. You can go and get frostbite in a matter of seconds. 5 people have already passed away today because they went out to do something and they basically froze in their garage. Just basically their system cannot handle it. So it's very important that, you kind of look at and take advantage of when you feel those sort of empty, depleted moments. And these are the shutdown to the agitation. This is the beginning of balance. It is to understand and reframe and sort of relabel those feelings. This is the beginning of clarity. This is the beginning of purity. I am cleansing myself and my aura. I'm getting a complete energy clearing of my perspective. And this I embrace and I now fill with. So, and then look and do something with intention today. Lighting a candle during the day, lighting 6 candles, lighting 4 candles during the day, having one in the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room. How can you move things around and adjust it with a sort of healing feng shui today? How can you make adjustments in your personal environment and claim your free will and your empowerment? It is to understand that once you become aware of and acknowledge and face sometimes these low, what you might feel the low energy, low end, sort of low vibration states, that is sort of you're at the drawing board, literally and figuratively as well. So begin to draw and just sort of draw from that present moment and embrace it and realize that it's oftentimes the end stages of grief and acceptance of letting go of that trauma bond, that struggle within you, and begin to notice, when do I launch off into the struggle? And then how can I bring it back in the reins to peace and focus? How can I begin to focus on what's important rather than, falling back, going into that knee-jerk reaction? How can I become more aware and go, whoa, reel it back in. Have a little self-priming statement or flashcard that you can use that signals to your subconscious mind, hey, we got this. We're back on positive early direction thinking. The subconscious mind is very sensitive to images. So if you have a flashcard, go and get a flashcard. I have a wonderful life. Begin to put that on your refrigerator. Put it together with an image that specifically is a reminder to your subconscious, and begin to have intentional gaze. You're like feeding the internal well with what it needs to thrive and not just survive, but really what I like to call thrival. It's your buddy, Peace and Harmony, with you here today. I hope these videos do help. Please share and please subscribe for more great tools